Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie, here with another episode to explore how reading and writing can make life better. Now, last week was the first day of spring, and I tell you, I can feel it. Now, I'm not necessarily feeling it literally, because in my neck of the woods in upstate New York, it is still cold. The jackets and hats are still needed for a long walk, and there was even a lot of frost that resembled some light snowflakes on the ground not too recently, but figuratively, I can feel it. Everyone, everything just seems to be in a springtime frame of mind. Let me give you a couple of examples of these spring-like messages I've been getting just within the last couple of days. I follow a lot of authors, a lot of bloggers, a lot of writers, and I'm getting a lot of weekly updates and newsletters around the springtime shift. Catherine May, who is the author of Wintering and Enchantment, she has a Substack called The Clearing. And as part of that recent installment, she talked about 5 brilliant things. And those 5 brilliant things revolved around the newness of spring. And she just included tidbits and mic drops and quotes from the people in her world that could help us leap into this springtime frame of mind. Anna K. Morris, who has been on this podcast in the past, she is hosting, or I guess by the time this airs, she will have hosted a self-care retreat, a virtual self-care retreat. And there is all sorts of ideas to spring clean your life, whether it's spring cleaning and organizing your home, to spring cleaning your ideas for what you want the season to be. Spring cleaning as a self-care kind of metaphor seems to be quite prevalent. Now, I've also had spring updates from my favorite stationery stores. So One Canoe 2, Happy Planner, and Martha Brooke out of London, they have been sending their new spring releases, their new spring lineups, and they are lovely. I even got an update from a local winery in town about new spring cocktails to try, which I'm going to attempt to turn into a mocktail. Now, of course, all of my fellow book bloggers and book podcasters, they are coming out with their own spring selections. And one of my most recent favorites that fell into my inbox was from the School Library Journal. They were spring graphic novels for all ages. I love graphic novels. I love reading them and pairing them with their narrative counterparts if one exists. And this was just a really great list to get you in that springtime frame of reading, especially for graphic novels. Now, even Starbucks is getting into the springtime vibes. We've got lavender and coffee. I don't know. That is not going to be my thing, but it's there. And even my favorite chocolate bar, Hue, that one that is made out of just 4 ingredients, coconut sugar, dark chocolate, and cocoa butter and salt. It's the best chocolate bar, hands down, that I know. They are doing a spring sale. And even Venmo people, even Venmo sent me an email that said I could plan to split my spring adventures with my friends. So no matter where we look, springtime is everywhere and springtime is coming. But why? Well, the obvious answer is that the calendar is forcing us to look ahead to spring, but it seems to be more of a symbolic kind of shift as well. Personally, I think the embracing of springtime really is because it's a promise of a new transition. It's the promise of a new season. Now, not all of the changes and transitions that happen in our lives are good. I know that. But these repetitive, cyclical changes, like the changing of the seasons, it gives us a chance to have a new start once again. May not be the first of the new year, but every season gives us a chance to stop and reflect and regroup and plan. And especially for the springtime season, that comes with milder weather. And my favorite, it stays lighter later. That for me is the sure sign that spring is on its way. So I just feel like the whole world is looking up. Things are feeling just a little bit better, which brings me to the topic of our episode today, uplit. Yes, that's what I said, uplit. So uplit is a particular genre of reading. It's a specialized genre, a microgenre, if you will, that captures the beauty of books that makes us feel good. They are literally uplifting books, hence the name uplit. Now, this doesn't mean that these books don't have any hard themes or deep themes. It is not just fluff here, but it's in the way the characters deal with those challenges that they are faced that categorizes the book as an uplit genre. So uplit, typically these books have themes of kindness and connection at the core of the book, and the sense that this kindness and connection can make the world better and make the people in it feel better. It definitely has a hopeful, very optimistic tone, even if there are some darker or more complex themes or characters as well. It usually has some sort of love story threaded in some form. That doesn't mean it's a romance. It could, but it also could be love in terms of family bonds or friendship. The book typically in Uplit will evoke a strong sense of empathy. The readers will feel a strong sense of community. And the characters who are dealing with their issues, whether they are physical issues or life challenges or emotional issues like anxiety or grief or some sort of trauma, the characters go through that particular challenge in a way where they are changed and they come out better for it on the other side. So it's the way the character deals with what's going on that contributes to an uplit kind of genre, because the ending typically, if not a happy ending, which many of them do, it means that they have come full circle. And the reader can typically be content with what has arrived at the end of the book. Things may not have gone perfectly, but you can feel good about where it is, right? Uplifting, uplit. Now, those are the core features of Uplit, but there also are some additional, maybe you call them supplementary features, that these features aren't in all books that might be classified as Uplit, but they are in many of them. So often, many Uplit books feature older characters, right? So think about A Man Called Uwe. Think about The Authenticity Project. Think about The Switch. Often, these uplit books contain dogs. I mean, who doesn't love a good puppy or a good dog? I'm thinking of Ruth Hogan's book, Dog Days here. Now, there typically is some sort of love involved, as I mentioned. And so some uplit books do have a romantic storyline. So, right, if we think of Beth O'Leary's The Switch again, that would fall there. Or The Music Shop by Rachel Joyce. They usually have a very quirky cast of characters too. And these quirky characters are kind of unlikely friends that are brought together by the events of the story. Again, the Authenticity Project is a wonderful example. The Reading List by Nina George is another great one. And even Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting, or better known as The People on Platform 5 in London, that is another book that showcases that. So it's those quirky cast of characters and those unlikely friends that start off in the beginning of the book as outsiders or isolated in some way, but typically come together with that strong sense of community and connection at the end. And so you might think about Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, or maybe even Frederick Bachman's Anxious People, right? If you're just thinking of those books, and if you have read any of those titles, you likely can instantly evoke the feeling that I'm talking about when you think about uplit. They're happy books. Not all happy things happen in them, but they are feel-good books. Maybe not from beginning to end, but by the end, you are uplifted, and again, you feel content. So I've already mentioned a couple of the books: The Switch by Beth O'Leary, Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting by Claire Pooley. We've got Claire's Authenticity Project. Oh, hands down, one of my favorites. But also you might think about books like The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. Oh, I loved that book. It's a book about books, of course, which makes it even better. Maybe you're a fan of T.J. Klune's The House on the Cerulean Sea. What about Ruth Hogan's The Keeper of Lost Things? One of my favorite books to recommend for book clubs. Those are the kinds of books that would be characterized in this specialty or microgenre of uplit. But I want to specifically recommend 3 books that I think you should add to your TBR stack this spring that would definitely uplift your mood if you read them. Here is the first book that I want to share. It's called When You Read This by Mary Adkins. It was published back in 2019, and it is a book that had me at hello because of the format. This is a book that is told completely in a series of emails, blog posts, online therapy submissions, text messages, legal correspondence, home rental bookings, and other snippets of our virtual lives. The format is so inviting. Now, the content is uplit, but remember, uplit doesn't mean there aren't any kinds of challenges inside. It's just how the character deals with them and how the book comes around at the end. And so this book is about Iris and it's about Smith. And unfortunately, Iris has died very early in life at 33 by a terminal illness. Now, Smith is devastated. And in that devastation is actually quite surprised to discover that in the last 6 months of her life, she created a secret blog. It was a secret blog that was capturing her state of mind and her thinking, her often funny musings on what it meant to be at the end of your life, of a life quite not fulfilled. Now, she made one request to Smith, and that was to get those posts published into a book. And that is the whole premise of this novel. Now, Smith is trying to do that, but in order to do so, he has to get the approval of her big sister, Jade. Now, Jade is so overcome by loss and grief that this is a really difficult thing. Now, they each are carrying their own baggage. They each have unresolved past. They each have unresolved things with each other, with that ultimate goal of getting that blog published. You see how that chain of events unravels and unfolds, and you learn a lot from the contents of that blog as well. So when you read this by Mary Adkins, a great start for your uplit TBR that'll get you in likely a different format of reading that you're used to and bring you more of an epistolary novel kind of vibe as well. So that was the first book. The second one that I recommend is a book called Less by Andrew Sean Greer. Now, this is more of your typical fiction narrative, right? There aren't any epistolary novel bells and whistles here, but there are so many overlapping themes. And this actually is the first book in a series called Arthur Less. So I want to read to you what the publisher says about this one, because I think the setup is just, it's wonderful. Here's the problem. You are a failed novelist about to turn 50. A wedding invitation arrives in the mail. Your boyfriend of the past 9 years, now engaged to someone else. You can't say yes. It would be all too awkward. And you can't say no. It would look like defeat. On your desk are a series of half-baked literary invitations you've received from around the world. Question: how do you arrange to skip town? The answer: you accept them all. Thus begins an around the world in 80 days fantasy that will take Arthur Less to Mexico, Italy, Germany, Morocco, India, and Japan, and put thousands of miles between him and the problems he refuses to face. What could possibly go wrong? Well, I'm sure that you're guessing that a whole lot of things can go wrong, and I won't give any spoilers, but let's just say some of the things that go wrong are wild, are crazy, are shocking, are funny. There's those themes of kindness, of connection, of love. This is truly an uplit book that is sure to add a new layer of complexity to your TBR. So that's Less by Andrew Sean Greer. Now, book number 3 is not just an uplit book, but it's an uplit book that I think many of you will enjoy because it also is kind of a family saga book. But it's the way the family deals with that family saga that turns it into uplit. The book I'm talking about is Emma Straub's All Adults Here. It was published back in 2020. Now, I love a good family saga, and so this one appeals to me greatly, especially when the families kind of figure things out. And maybe they don't figure things out perfectly, but relationships are mended or decisions are made that set everyone in a good direction. So it starts off with Astrid. And Astrid, unfortunately, witnesses a school bus accident in the center of her town. And as she witnesses that accident, it jostled a loose, repressed memory from her young parenting days. And that sets off a whole chain of events. She's realizing that maybe she wasn't quite the parent she thought she had been to her now grown 3 adult children. And she's wondering what that consequence is, right? So you're going to learn about her 3 children. Her youngest son is considered drifting and unfocused, making his own parenting mistakes. Her daughter is pregnant and wants to be, yet is struggling to give up her own adolescence. And her oldest is just so focused on measuring his adult life according to standards that no one else seems to share. And so the question is, so many years later, who gets to decide which long ago lapses were the ones that matters? Who gets to decide which apologies really count? And this is where Astrid's 13-year-old granddaughter and a new friend kind of come to save the day and model the kind of courage it takes to tell the truth to the people that you love the most. And so this book has so many good themes in here. There's humor, there are adult siblings, aging parents, high school boyfriends, those middle school mean girls. the lifelong effect of your birth order, if you have siblings, and all of the things that seem to follow us into adulthood, whether we like them or not, they're all here in this novel. And I'm not going to give spoilers away, but again, it's that ending. It's that full circledness, that contentedness, that just that feeling that when you close the last page, that turns it into uplit. Now, I've realized in this process of learning about uplit and exploring some books that I recommend for you today in this episode, I realized that most of the fiction books that I absolutely adore are uplit. They really are. I enjoy books that make me feel good. I enjoy books that make me feel better than I did before. I enjoy books that help me see the better side of things, the positive side of things, and see how people go through whatever they're going through and make it out on the other side a little bit better. It's making me want to rethink the whole way I classify books. So you know that I have a bookish spreadsheet, and I am that nerd who tracks the books she reads on a bookish spreadsheet. And if that appeals to you, by the way, just go to alitlife.com, click on my freebie category, and you can download your spreadsheet and start doing the same. But right now, the genres on my bookish spreadsheet are pretty general: realistic fiction, historical fiction, poetry, biography, epistolary novels. And I'm realizing as I get into the nitty-gritty of micro genres, I talked about cozies before in a previous podcast episode, and now I'm talking about uplit. I really want to decipher which kind of specialized or micro genre I'm reading within that larger genre. So I do think I'm going to make some changes to my reading log. We are pretty early in 2024, so I think I can make the changes and go back and backlog them. And uplit, I think, is definitely going to be something that I start keeping track of. Now, I would love to know what you think of that. How detailed do you get in your book recordings? Now, maybe you only jot down the book you're reading in your notebook and you don't need to jot down the genres that you have. That's okay. Or maybe you're like me and you do like to track the genres that you're reading so that you can make sure you have as wide of a reading life as possible. Now, if you look at my bookish spreadsheet right now, it looks like I do have this nice wide reading life where I read in multiple genres. But if I looked at the biggest genre I read, realistic fiction, you can definitely see that just about all of those would likely be considered uplit. And I want to vary that a bit. So if you have thoughts about your reading log, if you track your genres in this micro genre kind of way, I would love to hear about it. But before we end the episode, I want to switch gears because we've talked about uplit in reading, but what about uplit in writing? Now, I would love to give you some uplifting prompts to welcome spring, just so that we can have a parallel reading and writing focus in this uplifting kind of way. Now, if you are in my Get Literate Patreon community, you can find out more at getliterate.co. It's only $5 a month, and you get a weekly bonus episode, a weekly first chapter Friday, a live book club, and a whole bunch of other things too. But if you're already in that community, you know that my recent bonus post was a graphic and a bunch of recommendations to welcome spring in an uplifting way using our notebook. And I want to share 5 of those journaling notebooking recommendations that were there in hopes that it helps this audience that's listening to these episodes dust off the dust on their notebooks and declare notebooking as a goal for your springtime routine. And what I love about these 5 is that they are all prompts that welcome spring, but in very different ways, so that you can choose the one that works best for you. Number 1, my first recommendation is to write a letter to winter. I know, it's a little creative, it's a little wooey, but I have enjoyed writing letters to myself, to other people, and to objects in my notebook that I know I won't send, but do feel like some sort of therapeutic release. And so I recommend writing a letter of gratitude to the winner. What can you take away from that season that made you happy, that taught you something? You also can write about what you want to leave behind in that season. Just a fun, creative way to mark the transition into something new. And while you're at it, you might write a letter of what you hope for spring. So after you've finished sharing your thoughts with the winter season, think about what kind of thoughts you want to bring into the spring season. And there's no right or wrong here. It's whatever you want to say to the season that's past and whatever you want to say to the season that's coming. This hypothetical letter writing can be a really good release and a really fun way to plan the next couple of months. Now, if letter writing isn't your thing, what about a word splash? Now, I'm sure there are other names for this next kind of journal prompt, but it's basically putting down a whole bunch of words, a whole bunch of phrases, a whole bunch of ideas on the piece of paper, but ideally doing so willy-nilly. So not making this nice, logical, uniform list, but purposefully writing all over the paper in different ways, maybe in a different font, maybe with different colors, but just being a little bit more creative about it so that you are accessing a different part of your mind as you are pulling out ideas. And so the idea, the question, the prompt that I want you to think about and then attack word splash style on your page is this: what seeds do you want to plant in spring? Now, we could get very literal here, and you could tell me which seeds you are planting in your garden, or we can get figurative here, and you can tell me the seeds of other more, let's see, complex, mental, emotional, conceptual kinds of seeds that you want to plant. Right? So what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? How do you want to feel? Those are the three questions I always ask when I'm planning my reading and writing life in a particular season of life. And this is just a fun way to get creative about it. If you could plant all of those seeds, what would you plant? Now, number 3 is getting a little bit more literal, but also sticking with our creativity and borrowing a prompt from Gretchen Rubin. You know, I love Gretchen Rubin. Her book, Life in 5 Senses, is such a smash success. And in that book, she talks about making a 5 senses portrait. You can make a 5 senses portrait for something that has passed or you just experienced as a way to preserve the memory. Or you can make a 5 senses portrait for something you're looking forward to as a way to be intentional about the season you're moving into. So I recommend making a 5 senses portrait for spring. What do you want it to look like, to feel like, to smell like, to taste like, right? What are the recipes you want to try, the places you want to go, the things you want to do? It can be fun to do that in a 5 senses portrait, which basically is just a graphic organizer of sorts that you can print off from her website if you prefer, or just draw in your notebook 5 squares, and then either write or sketch things that you want to do and feel and be related to the 5 senses in those shapes. Now, number 4, this is where all of my fellow list makers can rejoice because I'm recommending that you make a listicle for spring. Now, there are so many different listicles we could make, right? Things I'm grateful for in spring, things I want to enjoy in spring, flowers I want to plant in spring. But here's one I want you to consider because I think springtime is kind of the metaphorical season of letting go of that cold winter past and shedding all that outer clothing and coming into something new. I'd love for you to make a list called Acts of Courage and write down between 5 to 10 small acts of courage you could take in this coming season that could make you feel good or could make life better. Those could be really simple acts of courage, like text a friend that you haven't talked to in a while and check in on them. Or they could be bigger, like put in an application to go back to school or take a workshop. Consider creating that list, big or small, and then keeping it close by or tabbing it in your notebook with a sticky note so that you can refer back to it and keep yourself going with those small acts of courage throughout the springtime. I started a brand new, really tiny notebook on the small acts of courage I was taking. Now, most of my acts of courage were related to starting my second podcast, but I'm realizing what a powerful tool that really is. I think it was in the movie We Bought a Zoo with Matt Damon, where I think it was his wife who had passed away in a flashback told him, or maybe he told himself. I can't remember the details, but basically it was, you only needed 20 seconds of courage. How might life be different if you just took 20 seconds of courage? And so I urge you to make a list with those possibilities. And then finally, for my last recommendation, this recommendation is for my typical journalers. This is for my notebookers who like to write long form. This is for my morning page writers who just need a stream of consciousness kind of writing. Here's the prompt for you. What needs spring cleaning in your life? That's it. When I say that, I bet something comes to mind. It could be your closet that needs a good cleaning. It could be a relationship that needs a good cleaning. It could be anything, right? But likely something pops into your mind, and I urge you to just free write it. Just see where it goes. And if you're not quite sure to where to begin, just start by writing that question at the top. What needs spring cleaning in my life? And then start your sentence. Here are the things that need spring cleaning in my life. And I bet by the time you get to that, you'll have an idea. And if not, you just keep writing. I'm not really sure what needs spring cleaning in my life right now. If you keep going and don't let that pencil come off the page, the power of the morning pages, the power of the moving pencil often uncovers things that you didn't know were there. And any of these prompts, whether it was the letter, the word splash, the 5 senses portrait, the acts of courage list, or this more stream of consciousness writing, all of them give us the opportunity to feel better when we're done writing than we did when we started. And after all, that is exactly the gift that an uplit genre brings to us. And so we can recreate that in our notebook. So if you do, you are ready for spring. You are ready for this transition into a much lighter and brighter season of life. And so, I want to know what your recommendations are. What are your favorite uplit books? Or what books do you like recommending to people that you didn't know might be considered uplit, but now you know they are, and you could recommend those? And also, what are your favorite springtime journaling and notebooking prompts? I would love to know those too, and I can add them to my collection and maybe even add them to the graphic created in my Patreon community. So you can find me at alitlife.com, and you can click on the show notes and leave your comments there. You can head to your favorite social media platform and find me at AfinitoLit. And as always, you can click on that audio button in your favorite podcast platform, and you can send me a voice message instead. Either way, I hope this episode finds you looking forward to spring, and now even more looking forward to some uplit and some springtime writing in your notebook. So thanks for listening, everyone, and I will see you inside the next episode of the Get Literate podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing, if you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.